I would like to start by dedicating this webinar to the memory of Trayvon Martin and all the other young lives cut short by violence, particularly at the hands of law enforcement in this country.
Vulnerable users of the system are the ones that have seen an uptick in fatality numbers and serious injury numbers.
The Complete Streets Coalition, they work so hard and they put out their Dangerous by Design, and it says the same thing every year, that Black, Hispanic, Indigenous people are dying. We are overrepresented in the population that are dying by walking. So in this history lesson, how does that history lesson that you just walked us through get us to the fact that we are overrepresented in the people who are dying just trying to walk down the street?
You know, I use the phrase walking while Black. So we're walking while Black in red line communities. And in red line communities, there's lots of research showing that environmentally, more toxic waste facilities are placed in Black communities. More pollution facilities are placed in and around Black, brown, Native communities. And so when Black people are just walking while Black, they're breathing in these toxic fumes. So they're dying because of the intentional location. The expulsive zoning is what it's called in the academic literature, placing negative facilities in Black communities. So you can talk about liquor stores, you can talk about all kinds of other things that other people don't want in their community. You don't see in rich communities, but they're dumped and placed in red line Black communities.
So it's radical for Black women whose labor in this country has been the only thing that has been celebrated. It's radical for us to say, no, we can stop and take care of ourselves. And that's why we call it radical self-care. Not a self-care that is frivolous around bubble baths or long walks in the sunshine, but a radical self-care that says that my community needs me to be well in order to do the work that needs to be done. Therefore, I'm going to step back and take care of myself so that I can pour back in later.
Homes in Black neighborhoods are undervalued by 23%, and that's about $48,000 per home. Accumulatively, that's about $156 billion in lost equity. It would have paid for more than 4.4 million Black-owned businesses based on the average amount Blacks used to start up their firms. It would have paid for more than 8 million four-year degrees based on the average amount of a four-year public education. It would have replaced the pipes in Flint, Michigan nearly 3,000 times over. It's about approximately 97% of the damage of Hurricane Katrina, and it's double the annual economic burden of the opioid crisis.
And also the national parks dealt with years of discrimination and the erasure of the contributions that Black and Indigenous people have made to early public land preservation. How many young children know about the Buffalo Soldiers, or that the first superintendent of a park out in Yosemite and Sequoia, which were the first state parks to be created, was Black? We don't hear about that. So these things play a role in why Black people they don't see themselves.
People had the opportunity to connect with the idea of equity, and they didn't. They chose not to. So now, because equity is a buzzword, foundations are starting to prioritize equity. Now mainstream organizations want to start talking about equity. And here's what we say to that. When you talk about equity, you're going to talk about equity the way we talk about it. And you're going to be committed to it, or you're going to get out the way. We're not going to allow you to co-opt equity as a vehicle to improve our neighborhoods with sort of lip service.
I think what needs to be coupled with sort of this personal exploration and change is the yielding to people who are already there. And so one of the things that I recommend in a recent publication of mine is the reclassification of urban planning positions in civil service, so that people who are already fully aware of how this work can happen in a different way have access to those jobs and can begin to implement changes right away.
History is not on our side. So I don't think it's feasible to even ask, particularly young African-Americans, African-American men, because as an African-American woman, my experience is going to be even a little bit different than African-American men, to expect our community to say, arms open, come on in. That's not a reality.
Think about over the summer, like after the murder of George Floyd, 99% of that was protests. And there were occasional real other kinds of fury being displayed. So for example, the destruction of the police station in Minneapolis, from the Minneapolis people I've spoken to, I think that actually led to some fairly deep and much needed soul searching about race relations in Minneapolis, which have been terrible. I think it was disturbing to people, but made them ask good questions and have good conversations. So, it's sort of crisis as danger and opportunity. How do we turn a crisis and something that's harmful into an opportunity?
I think we're finally at that point where a lot of equity-based policy decisions are going to come out. And you could tell by some of the decisions that the president has made already.
There's nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can't solve. That we're constantly working in this white supremacist myth that states that the conditions and state of Black communities and neighborhoods are a direct result of the people in them. And we see, just from housing alone, billions are lost just because of the perception of Black people.
Segronomics, when you don't have resources in your neighborhood, and this is structural, it's not an individual deficiency. I like to tell people it's not the case that poor people decide to randomly cluster together. Come on, y'all, let's be poor. What are we gonna be poor? I don't know, let's be poor randomly. Over here, let's just cluster randomly and be poor together. That is not how it happened. You see, and I got a whole lot more, I just didn't have time to get into it. There are all kinds of policies, practices, systems, and budgets that were intentionally put in place so that when you're walking while Black, your sidewalks aren't as good in your neighborhood, the rec centers aren't as good, the parks aren't as good, the green infrastructure isn't there, the tree canopy isn't there.
I want to challenge everyone to ask themselves, are the values that you are bringing to the movement, must they be the same for everybody? Have you considered where you have shut out other people's values? So my advice would be, we must start to reconsider who we define as an advocate in this movement. We must start to reconsider the why of why we think it's important for people to be advocating, and we have to expand our definitions of that to include the things that matter most to communities that may not matter to you.
We cannot make Black lives matter if we don't make Black neighborhoods matter. Thank you.